March on Washington was a protest held on January 21st, 2017, which according to organizers and rags like the Washington Post was set to be the biggest inaugural demonstration of all time, having something like 200,000 to 500,000 women and minority feminists in attendance. Now, news sources that I'm looking at today are actually placing the numbers at about 500,000 people, so good estimates, I guess. Vox even claimed that it was going to be the largest gathering of people with disabilities in U.S. history. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it's just too wonderful. So let's talk about this protest. What is it, who was involved, what it stood for, and why it was completely and utterly pointless. This protest was set up hastily the day after the God Emperor was elected, beginning with a woman called Teresa Shook, a retired attorney in Hawaii, who set up the Facebook page called Million Women March. She wasn't the only one to have the idea. Several other groups with charming names like Million Pussy March popped up within hours of the election. However, Million Women March and its grandmotherly founder came out victorious, with about 35,000 crying, screaming, shaking feminists having joined the group in the first 24 hours, with about 100,000 within the first few days. However, because the left has begun to cannibalize itself at an increasingly rapid rate, within days, perhaps hours, of the group soaring in popularity on Facebook, a large portion of those who had joined began to screech that the name Million Women's March was cultural appropriation of a black female protest which occurred in 1997, preceding the Million Man March in 1995. And thus the name was changed to Women's March on Washington. Seems like a good compromise, right? Wrong! Again, the organizers were accused of appropriation for the name's similarity to the March on Washington, which culminated in Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech. Still, the name stuck, and although some refused to use it, at least the on Washington bit, referring to it just as Women's March, generally it's being called the Women's March on Washington. And thus, from the very beginning, we have our first schism in this so-called movement or protest. The animosity towards white women in this group was palpable from its inception, not only because of the cultural appropriation of the name of the protest, twice over, but because 53% of white women voted for Trump. Of course, 42% of women in general voted for Trump, but forget that. Anyway, the fact that 53% of women voted Trump indicates that, counter to the feminist narrative, not all women are feminists. Yikes! In fact, data show us that about 75% of the populace does not identify as feminist. But also that women aren't this great big monolithic Borg-like hive mind. Oh no, they're breaking the conditioning, gas them! And that's just my basic speculation of where this backlash about wanting to keep white women away from the protest arose, that, oh, the white women, they're the enemy, they voted Trump. And that's because this type of special snowflake knows how to strategically play on white guilt to get anything their obnoxious and toxic little social justice hierarchy of power wants. And we'll get into that later. But because if we're not being inclusive enough of black women, then we're not being inclusive enough of trans women, then we're not being inclusive enough of gender fluid, man-asexual turnips. Part of the problem was that this entire idea was just an emotional reaction to the election results. Basically, their girl lost, so everyone crying and shaking on election night, despite how disparate their politics and priorities, joins this unified group. Of course, that meant that internal civil war within these groups, all concerned with making their own shrill voice scream the loudest, was inevitable. Coming out the gate, it was obvious that there was no cohesion among these various feminists, each of whom wanted to hijack the march for their own particular cause, by playing an epic game of oppression Olympics, determining which brand of feminism is the most oppressed. Beyond just the outrage concerning the name of the event itself, which at first lacked any leadership and continued to be a loose connection of, quote, activists, over time, different women, mostly those claiming to represent more and more fringe elements of feminism and LGBTQ, pushed themselves to the forefront. And as such, the schism in the group continued to splinter. Now it wasn't just cultural appropriation, it was also white feminism controlling everything, because only white women have the funds to travel to DC and stay for a few nights in the district's finest hotels. And they would need to stay for a few nights, after all, because there is a subsequent Planned Parenthood protest at the Capitol. Oh, Planned Parenthood. We'll get to you in a moment. First, we need to continue to cover the rest of the splintering in the protest's disparate little subcultures all clawing for attention. So yes, apparently it requires a privilege, one only possessed by white women, to travel and stay in DC. Thanks, feminism and the left, for being the biggest racists around. Without you, I might start to think black women and other minorities were equally capable of being successful individuals. Silly me. Anyway, so the constant shouts of "check your privilege" resounding throughout the Facebook group certainly didn't help to create a more cohesive circle. So, More to the point, why is this group so broken and splintered, other than what I've already mentioned? Well, you have the obvious reasons, that's identity politics and virtue signaling your levels of oppression, which amongst the social justice leftist social identity is, in an interesting twist of rhetoric, equivalent to social capital and organizational power. That is, within social justice communities, the more oppressed you claim to be, the more power you have. Backward, innit? That's the progressive stack. At the top of oppression is race, which Muslims get lumped into because Islam is a race now. Then heteronormativity, so being trans. Then gender. Then sexuality, and oddly, at the bottom, ability and class. I think the first poster that they put out for this event alone makes it clear who's on top of the progressive stack. But beyond just being a big Facebook oppression Olympics exercise to express this stack and each individual's role in their social hierarchy, the real question is, what the fuck is the point of this protest? Evie Harmon, a South Carolina-based local organizer, claimed the protest was not anti-Trump, but rather just, quote, the reaction of women and minorities across the world who are very disturbed by the rhetoric that was said over the last year and a half. Okay, so what are you trying to achieve here if it's not specifically anti-Trump, which it clearly is, even according to Jonathan Chait of the New York Magazine in his little ad for it? Is it just a chance to practice your knitting while getting a chance to virtue signal on Instagram with your handmade pink pussy hat? Is this some ingenious false flag created by Trump to get fat women off their couches more in one day than they have in 8 years to help fight obesity? You say it's about women. All women? Really? That's why you removed New Wave Feminism, a pro-life feminist group, as a sponsor, and made it clear that pro-life feminists, not just women, but feminists, weren't allowed, right? If it's about all women, why can't you decide whether or not you stand in solidarity with sex workers, arguably the most vulnerable female profession? Even Hillary Clinton was snubbed by some in the group because she got doped up enough on ketamine to make an appearance at Trump's inauguration ceremony. Seriously, what the hell is going on? What are you trying to achieve here? If it hasn't become thoroughly evident by this point, these whiny, attention-seeking crybabies are people who have never interacted with other humans outside of their internet safe space. So you know they're exactly the folks you want to organize a supposedly 500,000-person protest. And up until mid-December, they proved their inability to organize by failing to secure permits to protest at all. Although the group obviously did eventually obtain a permit near the White House, they were denied one at the Lincoln Memorial, which had been the initial planned place. By November 14th, no requests for permits had been submitted, at least according to the Washington Post, and although I don't have any reliable information indicating when a permit request was filed, it certainly seems like the lack of leadership and infighting caused them to drag their feet. Hysterically, when it came out that the reason their late request to reserve the Lincoln Memorial had been denied was because it was procured by Trump's people for the inauguration, likely, the second that he won, these screaming banshees cried oppression rather than admitting personal fault. Of course, it's never our fault. Oh, and it wasn't just the people involved in the planning itself who seemed incredibly and completely incompetent. Just check out this poster that WashPo Express printed. Yep, that's a bunch of little pink women forming a symbol of Mars, aka male. Anyway, I personally can't say I have any experience securing a permit from the National Park Service, but I can't help but think, considering how broken and goalless this group is, that some balls were likely dropped, although certainly none of them belonging to the organizers. Speaking of the leaders and organizers of this group, let's take a little look at them, shall we? The first community organizer, a bookstore owner, Candace Huber, was essentially shamed out of her position as an organizer. Why, you ask? Can you take a guess? I'll wait. If you guessed, because she's white, then hooray! 10,000 oppression points to you! Huber wrote an entire self-flagellating article on their website about why she needed to step aside for women of color to take the reins. And she wasn't alone. The organizer of the Pittsburgh chapter, I guess if you can call it that, Rosie Campos, also lashed herself in self-hatred for her white skin.
Sorry I'm white! Sorry I'm male! Sorry I'm white! Sorry I'm male!
And thus, the women of color took control of the movement. So, on to them. Linda Sarsour, one of the leaders who took the place of Candace Huber, is an active proponent of Sharia law, making absurd claims that paint countries ruled by Sharia as paradises, without college loans, and devoid of debt or interest. If you're not really familiar with Sharia law, well, I can do a whole video on that, but yes, Linda, you're probably correct. Women wouldn't have college loans or debt, because women can't go to college or own property under Sharia law. But hey, sure sounds nice when you don't put any context or facts into it, eh? Bob Land is another of the 4 leaders of the movement, who wrote in her Origins and Inclusion statement on Facebook, quote, "The reality is that the women who initially started organizing were almost all white," end quote, and that, quote, "It is important to all of us that white women are engaged in this effort to understand their privilege and acknowledge the struggle that women of color face," end quote. Oh, that's nice. Okay. And just to, parrot that a little bit and reinforce that thought, another organizer and administrator of the Facebook page, Shishi Rose, made this little rant. I'll throw it up on the screen, but I won't dignify it by reading the dribble verbatim, nor would I want to rot any of my audience's brain cells. Let me explain the gist of it, though. White people are all racist, privileged subhumans, who need to shut the fuck up, stop talking, because black people are the only ones who matter here. And white women involved in the protests got the message. A white female minister, Jennifer Willis, told the New York Times that she and her daughters decided not to go after being made to feel unwelcome due to the color of their skin. Again, great job on that unity, feminism. Speaking of unity, we've got this cool tweet from Bernie. Yeah, don't worry too much about the division there, Bernie. I think they got it down pat. So I had to listen to some of the speakers at the event to see if I could figure out what they were really on about. And it's about what you would imagine. Ashley Judd made an enormous fool of herself by reading what apparently is slam poetry, so let's go through her speech, because she brings up most of the usual suspects.
A man whose words are a diss track to America. Electoral College sanctioned hate speech contaminating this national anthem. I'm not as nasty as Confederate flags being tattooed across my city.
First of all, what hate speech? Where are the proofs? Come on, give me one piece of proof where Donald Trump has engaged in hate speech. And I mean real hate speech, not, oh, he made me upset because something he said was kind of rude and crass. No, honey, that's not hate speech. And secondly, people can get tattoos of whatever they want. I'm sure nothing's gonna stop you from getting a hideous tramp stamp tattoo of a nautical star.
Blacks are still in shackles and graves just for being black. Slavery has been reinterpreted as the prison system in front of people who see melanin as animal skin.
Okay, sure. Show me one example of how black people are still enslaved. A real example, not this jail equals slavery example. The fact is, black people commit more crime, which means they're more likely to go to jail. These are uncomfortable facts, but they're facts nonetheless. You don't get to equate jail with slavery just because it fits your little narrative, you mental invalid.
I'm not as nasty as a swastika painted on a pride flag. And I didn't know devils could be resurrected, but I feel Hitler in these streets. A mustache traded for a toupee. Nazis renamed the cabinet.
Oh, please. These literal Hitler comparisons are getting to be a little bit too much. Show me some evidence for whatever you're saying, please. Again, where are the proofs?
Electroconversion therapy, the new gas chambers shaming the gay out of America, turning rainbows into suicide. No.
I don't get this. Trump is pro-gay. He is the only pro-gay Republican to have ever run. He's also pro-trans, if you can believe that. So why do you think he's so anti-gay, he's so anti-trans, he's so anti-black? You have no evidence. Unfortunately, reality is a real thing, and there are facts that exist, and you have to show proof if you're going to make statements like this. Otherwise, it's slander.
I am not as nasty as racism, fraud, conflict of interest, homophobia, sexual assault, transphobia, white supremacy, misogyny, ignorance, white privilege.
Once again, he's never supported any of this. I guess except white privilege because it doesn't fucking exist. So, no, this is so infuriating to listen to. I don't think I can do it much longer.
Like the fight for wage equality. Scarlett Johansson, why were the female actors paid less than half of what the male actors earned last year? See, even when we do go into higher paying jobs, our wages are still cut with blades sharpened by testosterone. Why is the work of a black woman and a Hispanic woman worth only 63 and 54 cents of a white man's privileged daughter?
The wage gap is simply the average earnings of men and women working full-time. It does not count for different job positions, hours worked, or different jobs. It has nothing to do with the same job. It has nothing to do with discrimination.
I can't see. My eyes are too busy praying to my feet, hoping you don't mistake eye contact for wanting physical contact. Half my life I have been zipping up my smile, hoping you don't think I want to unzip your jeans.
Sounds like you think pretty highly of yourself to me, honey. Guys are always looking at you, always trying to get in bed with you. This is just more of that rape culture shit. It makes me so angry. There's no such thing as the rape culture. Actually, no, I take that back. There is such a thing as a rape culture. In Saudi Arabia. In Sudan. Yeah, there's a rape culture over there. The 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 or 1 in 3 or whatever it is on this specific day of the week that you've decided that statistic means, that study has been debunked 1,000 times. This study is so abhorrent that it makes me almost physically ill as a complete affront to social science and statistic methodology. Do you know how much of a not rape culture we live in? One where rapists, particularly child rapists, have to be kept away from the general prison population because the other prisoners will rape and even kill them. And it's not just as prisoners. Once they're out, these people are in a list for life. They can't live anywhere near a school, and they have to periodically go tell all their neighbors, "Hi, I'm a human piece of garbage." A false accusation condemns an innocent person to hell. Now, of course, if you are a rapist, yeah, you kind of deserve that shit. But if you're not, it's a serious, serious accusation. The problem is that rape is difficult to prove. You pretty much have to go to a hospital shortly after the event, have a rape kit performed, to test for DNA evidence as a sign of struggle. That's because we live in a democracy, folks, where people are innocent until proven guilty. If you want to switch the game around and do the guilty until proven innocent thing, again, I seriously suggest you try Qatar. I hear it's lovely this time of never. Yes, rape is a horrific crime, but that's why it's so important that it's processed justly and fairly, and with as much scrutiny as any other crime. Now, while she didn't have much to say, Cecile Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood, also spoke at the rally. And much of the focus appears to be on reproductive rights and on the defunding of Planned Parenthood. So I wanted to take a quick aside, or as quick as I can be about something, to explain this a little. So first of all, Trump has never actually said anything about wanting to undo Roe v. Wade. He just wants to defund Planned Parenthood. And if you know anything about Planned Parenthood, you might understand why. So first of all, Planned Parenthood's funding from the federal government does not go towards abortions currently. All of that funding comes from private donors or other organizations. That means that abortions will not become any more expensive if they are defunded by the Fed. But staunch supporters of Planned Parenthood should be wary of its history either way. If you don't know, and I think most people do at this point, but it still should be said, the woman who founded the organization, Margaret Sanger, was a racist, Nazi eugenicist who wanted to systematically extinguish the Negro population. That's why Planned Parenthood offices have been historically all traditionally located in black neighborhoods. And that's why to this day, despite being about 13% of the population, 28% of abortions that are performed are on black children. In New York City, there are more black children aborted than there are born. So if you're the type of person who thinks it's so funny to joke about white genocide, but you're out there fighting for Planned Parenthood in your pussy costume, you're essentially supporting fucking black genocide, you ignorant twat. Look at the changes in racial population sizes over time. Do you see how the black population is stagnant? You can thank Margie Sanger for that one, or at least in part. As for the other services that Planned Parenthood provides, like birth control, condoms, and breast cancer screening, those are all great things, and I hope they don't become more expensive. But again, right now, abortions are not covered by the Fed anyway, so nothing that you're supposedly so worried about should change. And for the way I've heard some women talk about abortion, like Lena Dunham wishing she could have had one just for funsies, or this wench on Colbert.
It's so scary and sad and heartbreaking, and I just wish I could be funny. Get your abortions now.
It's hard for me to not understand why there are people out there who want to restrict access to abortions. I mean, I'm pro-choice, but come on, stop it with this shit. It's disgusting, and it's why you keep radicalizing people against your side. Now, this protest comes just the day after Trump's inauguration, which was accompanied by violent Antifa protests in the Capitol. Antifa, of course, anti-fascist. Protesters could be seen breaking down windows, burning cars, just to show how much they care about a democratic election and holding up the results of said election. As always, I am astounded by the doublethink, where a group who calls everyone and everything around them fascist literal Hitlers are the ones protesting a democracy through physical violence and destruction of property. So with all the violence and destruction that preceded it the day before, the Women's March in Washington was at least a less violent, more hysterical crying protest, although nothing will ever, ever, ever beat Inauguration Days.
States, President
If nothing else, I can say that the Women's March was a peaceful protest with some exceptions.
Fuck you.
Okay, so wouldn't you say that it would be feminine? No, I'm just asking you a question. Do I seem unreasonable to you? Because they seem really pleasant. Am I coming across as pleasant right now, there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just trying to have a conversation here.
I'm trying to have a conversation with you.
Go away. Get out of my fucking face. I will break your camera. You do not have the right to...
Whoa! Guys, let's calm down. Calm down.
You don't have the right to film me everywhere you go.
And much more peaceful, obviously, than the riots of the previous day, despite the ignorant, violent rhetoric being spewed by hacks like Madonna.
Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I am outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
By the way, a woman who offered to give blowjobs to men who voted for the Hill Dog. Class act, Madonna there. Real class act. So, congratulations, ladies. You brought in a bunch of money for a bunch of hotels in D.C., a bunch of airlines, and buses to drag your corpulent asses up to the Capitol so you could cry hysterically and dress up as walking vaginas. And for what point? For what goal? Hell if I know, and I'm pretty sure you don't know either, considering how unorganized, splintered, and self-cannibalizing your group is, with no definitive message. Intersectionality at its finest. As each of them wants attention for a different little niche, and with no cohesive structure, goal, or plan, all that happened is a bunch of women got together to have a very expensive cry-in. But even if you didn't manage to burn down the system that's supposedly oppressing you ladies, at least you managed to burn some calories in your pink pussy hats. Oh, and the gals who showed up to this thing? You could not have imagined them more accurately if you tried. Here's a little montage.
Symbolic of his struggle against reality.
Finally, and this is my last aside, for all the people out there claiming Trump's inauguration was empty and void compared to Obama's, or that the size of this pity party shows that people are somehow against the very man they elected, two things for you. One, D.C. is an incredibly liberal city, as are all the surrounding areas of Northern Virginia and Maryland. I know, because I've lived there, but also because of these nice data. Two, Republicans have jobs. That cover everything for you? Good. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.